Hey everybody, it's Bree from Sky Candy here, and I wanted to chuck together a quickie video to demonstrate how I got my mods set up in Morrowind. For anyone who's reading my Morrowind mods guide and wondering how the heck it's done. Now, this isn't an expert guide and it's not a beginner guide, so if you don't know how to open a zip file, this is probably not for you. But if you're a smart person and you think you could probably get to an intermediate mod stage, then I think this will help you out. So, before we get moving, I want to make sure you've done a few of the things I outlined in my blog post. First, you need to have Morrowind actually installed, and the Steam version is fine. In fact, that's the one that's going to be most accessible for most of you. Everything I'm about to describe today works perfectly in Steam. I'm using it myself because I'm lazy and I don't want to pull my discs out. You're also going to need a couple programs. You need to make sure you have installed the Morrowind code patch, WryeMash, Mlox, and the Morrowind script extender. Now, I'm not going to walk you through the code patch or the script extender since those are pretty self-explanatory, and the choices you make in the code patch are, well documented. They're up to you. But Mash and Mlox are pretty confusing for newcomers, and I don't think they need to be. And Mash especially kind of stands in your way until you master it. You're not really going to get anywhere in modding until you understand how Mash works, or at least have figured out the basics. So I think that once you master this, you can kind of own almost any Elder Scrolls game because there's a version of MASH. There's one in Oblivion called Bash, and I don't even remember what the one in Skyrim is called, but Skyrim has one too. So if you're thinking about modding any of these games, you really need to understand some of these basic concepts with some of these programs that just they're accessible in all kinds of different versions of the Elder Scrolls games. I should probably also point out that I'm doing all of this on an old laptop because that's actually where I usually play Morrowind. If I'm on my desktop, I'm probably playing Skyrim, but Morrowind works pretty nicely on this old machine, so bear that in mind for the purposes of the video. But then again, we're just looking at Windows, so it shouldn't be that big a deal. So next what we're going to do is take a look at our Game Steam install folder, and that's going to be wherever you installed it within Steam. For me it's Steam, Steam Apps, Common, Morrowind, and here's my entire game install right here. You can see it's got my saves, and it's also got some additional programs that I've installed, plus the all-important data files folder. Now when you click on this, you're going to see basically all of the mods you have installed, and if you have a clean install, you're probably going to only see a few of the official files in here. It's not going to look like mine. Mine is actually already filled out with tons of ESP files, which are the basic mods for the game, and also a whole ton of folders that basically include overwrites for official game files. The ones you're probably going to be dealing with the most are textures and meshes, and I think it's really important to pay attention to this particular file structure because every mod setup you look at is going to obey this exact file structure with the ESP and then meshes in the meshes folder and textures in the textures folder nested accordingly. So pay attention to that because that's going to come back up later. Okay, so we're done looking at the Game Steam install folder, and now we're going to move on to WryeMash. Now, you should probably already have installed WryeMash, preferably the standalone version that I linked to you, because it's got the Python understructure already bundled together, so you won't have to install Python or anything else separately, and that should make it pretty easy for you. Now, during the install, you'll probably be prompted to select or at least agree to the install location for your mash mods folder. I'm not even sure it's called mash mods. That's just what I call mine. You can call it whatever you want. I'm pretty sure. But once you have done that, you're going to have this handy dandy folder full of all of your mash mods, and you're thinking, what is a mash mod? Because what I'm showing you right here is actually a folder full of RAR files. Well, this is the beauty of using WryeMash right here, because you don't actually have to have some kind of magical proprietary format for the mods that you're actually installing. All you really need is a zip file or a 7-zip or a RAR, and I'm sure there's other formats that work. You basically put all the stuff you want to install inside of a simple archive like this, following the directory structure I showed you before, and then you can install it from within WryeMash. So I'm going to just open up one of these, doesn't even matter which one it is. And so you can see that the top level of my RAR has my ESP file, an ESM file, a text file, just a README, and a folder full of icons, just under his own structure here. And once this gets installed within the game, it will just blow itself right out into the data files folder in exactly this setup. So essentially, as you're going along downloading mods, you might have to take them and reformat them a little bit. Sometimes they'll come within a bunch of nested folders you don't want. Sometimes they'll try to be helpful and they're not being helpful at all. Just make sure the top level actually is parallel with the data files folder, and you'll be fine. So this is what you'll do. You'll download everything, you'll get it set up, you'll put it in this folder wherever you've decided to save it. Like I said, mine's in a mash mods folder. It doesn't really matter at all. And you can also see that I have organized all of mine by name. This is actually going to matter. Like I have all of my gear mods are named with the word gear in front, just to kind of group them together in a kind of primitive way. You wouldn't need to do this in later versions for the future games, for the later Elder Scrolls games, but for the Morrowind one, I find this particularly useful. So your next goal is to actually open WryeMash itself, and it'll just be under the WryeMash folder wherever you installed that. It should be mash.exe, and once you open it, and I've already opened it here because it actually takes me quite a while. The more mods you have installed, the longer it takes to open. But I've got mine open already, and I have clicked over to the Installers tab, which is the first tab I want you to look at. Ignore everything else for right now. The Installers tab is going to show you an identical picture of the folder we just had open. It's going to show you every single one of those, in my case, RAR files, for all of the mods I could or already have installed. So you can go through mine, and since I've got mine sorted by in alphabetical order, you can actually see that I've got all of my core mods together, all of my gear mods together, and so on. Now normally when you would open this up, all of these colors would be red because I wouldn't have anything installed. This is another handy little trick here. All of these little plus signs change color based on the status of the install. So you can see here, I don't actually have this version of the Morrowind patch project installed, so it's got like an empty box. Whereas I do have this version of correct UV rocks installed, so it's green. And the green means it doesn't have a conflict, or at least an ostensible conflict with anything else. So that's good. That's a nice safe mod. Usually. It doesn't always work out that way. You can also see that, for example, the expanded La Femme armor has an orange icon which shows a conflict, and same with the yellow. There are different levels of conflicts, different levels of overwrite. Now that basically brings me to my first lesson in how Elder Scrolls modding works, and that's that everything you install can be overwritten by something else that is installed later. Order actually matters. Now here in this particular tab, what we're really going to be seeing in terms of overwrites is textures for the most part, because that's actually what I have a lot of in my game. So let me give you an example. If I install a mod by right-clicking on it and installing, very simple, if I like that. If I install a mod that has a texture that overwrites a shirt, let's call it shirt A, and then I install a second mod that basically overwrites that exact same shirt texture, that will be a conflict, and that will cause one of these yellow or orange icons to pop up. And only the second one will count. The first one will have been overwritten. Now sometimes you want that. Sometimes that's actually exactly what you want because you want a bunch of other things in that first mod and you don't mind that the second one is overwriting. And sometimes they're identical anyway and it doesn't matter, especially if you're using a lot of mods from the same exact modder. That person will often reuse assets across lots of different mods. Sometimes it's not wanted and you have to basically decide what order you're going to install all of these mods in. And this is part of the reason I use this totally crazy system for ordering all of my stuff, because I tend to want to group mods together and put them in more or less the same order as I'm installing them. It's generally safe to install your textures together because you kind of want them mentally in the same spot so that you can pick which ones are going to overwrite which ones. You have to get that order in your head. You can probably also see a related issue here, and that's if you uninstall the second mod, the shirt texture from the first mod is not actually going to magically reappear. In that case, it's pretty simple. You uninstall that second mod as needed, and then you'll go back and you'll click on something like install missing, and then that original file from the very first mod will reinstall itself and everything will be fine. It's just a little confusing at first. So at this stage I want you to go through and I want you to install all of the mods that you've put into your installers tab. paying attention to the order that you're installing them in, because remember, the textures in the ones you load last will be the things that actually load, and you'll be overwriting. So install them in the order that you want them to be in texture-wise. And once you've got all of that done, we're going to go over to the Mods tab and take a look at the chaos we have caused. And here we are in the Mods tab. Now, your Mods tab will look slightly different from this. Specifically, all of these little check marks will be unchecked. Basically, checking them just tells the game, please load me. Otherwise, you can leave it in your data files folder, which is basically what you're looking at right here, is that data files folder. You can leave them there, and generally the game won't pick them up. It's possible for it to if you tell it to later in your merge patch, but we'll get to that. For the most part, it has to be checked or it's not going to load. So go through and check everything. I also want you to go up to File, and I want you to have it sort by load order. Now, the reason I want you to sort it by load order is because load order matters for ESPs just the same way that install order matters for textures and other files. Let me explain it like this. When you have an ESP file can do all kinds of things, like put NPCs in the game, it can change locations, it can alter objects. If an ESP file is altering an object in a way, for example, say it's taking a particular herb and it's changing the price so that instead of 10 gold, it's 1 gold, that's exactly what will happen when you run this ESP file. On the other hand, if you then add a second ESP file that changes the same attribute and changes it to 2 gold, and that's the one you run after the first one, then that's the one that will actually stick. So when you actually load up your game, you might have both of these ESP files, one after the other, both changing the same thing, only the second one will count. That's why this matters, because anything you change in a later coming ESP file will overwrite everything that comes before it, as long as we're talking about the same object or the same NPC or the same inventory or whatever. So we have to make sure that everything is in the correct load order for the game to read so that the game operates the way you actually intend it to. So to make that happen, we're actually going to put WryeMash aside for a moment and load up Mlox. Mlox is a really cool little tool that basically shows you what you have installed, and then by using a user-created master list, essentially, it then decides what order your stuff should be in. It's not always right, and sometimes things don't matter, but for the most part, players have submitted really great information to make sure that this master list of sort of rules is actually pretty accurate. For example, here's one that I actually submitted a long time ago for the well house, which is one of my favorite houses in the game. I've actually got a mod called Necessities of Morrowind installed, and one of the things it does is change all of the wells in the game so that you can actually drink from them, which is really cool. That didn't work so well with this mod I have called Well House, which allows you to click on a well and go inside of it, and it's like a house. To make those two work together, you simply have to put them in the right order. Necessities of Morrowind, the one that changes all of the wells, has to load first, and then the one that just changes the one well has to go second, so that only that well is changed, and all of the other wells are changed the way my first mod wanted. Of course, since I came upon this conflict, I submitted the rule and they added it to the list. And that's how all of these rules came together. And it's actually pretty accurate, especially for most of the big, pretty famous mods at this point. One of the other things it will do is give you a wonderful loadout of messages about potential conflicts, warnings, problems. So you can look at mine, it's actually pretty short, but when I first started doing this, mine was very long, but you learn a lot pretty quickly. So for example, it'll tell you if there are any dirty edits in your load order, which you don't need to worry about that right now. For the most part, you won't run across very many major modern mods that have GMSTs. It'll tell you when you have some conflicts that you might overwrite, but in this case I want these to overwrite, so it's okay. It'll tell you if you don't need to actually check a particular file because it's not necessary. Here's a couple that are warning me about needing the script extender for them to work, which is cool because we've got that. So that's the kind of sort of thing it'll do. Sometimes it'll tell you when there's an update actually available and you don't have it yet, which is extra awesome. So once you've actually run this, And if you're pretty happy with what it's got, you're going to want to click Update Load Order, which mine is grayed out because mine is already identical, and then you're going to quit. And then you should be able to go back to WryeMash. You might need to refresh this, I can't remember. And this tab, the Mods tab, will now be in that same order that you just set with Mlox. Now, if you don't like all of the changes Mlox made, or you have some special knowledge for whatever reason about a certain mod, or maybe if it's even your mod, and you know it needs to go in a certain place, but Mlox simply doesn't know about it, you can actually change that from within WryeMash right here in this panel. So this is a good time to do that. Also, I wanted to point out that what we're doing here is not magic. When we're talking about load order, all we're really talking about is the timestamp, the date stamp that your file system has put on these particular mods. So that's really all WryeMash is doing. It's just doing it for you in a much easier way than actually having to hand do it. But that's how the game will read it otherwise. The game is looking for the order of timestamps, and that's how the game treats it unless you tell it otherwise. So that's actually the reason you need WryeMash or Mlox or another program to date these things. If you don't do that, the game will simply put them in the order it sees fit, and you'll just have a huge mess of your game. Alright, so at this stage we are going to need to do one more thing to get our load list working correctly. So you'll remember that I explained to you about how ESP files can overwrite each other depending on what's in them. Like the example of the herb. Let's say that we actually have two edits to the herb that are similar but not identical, and we don't want them to overwrite each other. In fact, we want both of the changes. So let's say mod A changes an herb to weigh 0, and mod B changes an herb to cost 10 gold. There's no real reason these two changes should conflict. Because of the way this particular game is set up, they do. And as usual, only the second one will count. And we actually want both. So to make both actually happen, we need to use WryeMash to create a patch that goes through and basically merges all of those little changes together so that they all cooperate with each other. And here's how we're going to make that little bit of magic happen. We're going to go back to the Game Steam install folder, or wherever it is that you installed WryeMash. We're going to click on WryeMash and then Mopey and then Extras, and you're going to find an ESP file called mashed lists in there. You're going to pull that out wherever you want it, and then we're going to go back to the Game Steam install folder. Go to data files, which might sound weird because I just told you not to drop anything in here manually, but this is the one exception. And you're going to drop mashed lists into this folder, and you can see I've already got mine, so I'm not going to do that here, but that's what you're going to want to do. So then we can close that, and I want you to go back to WryeMash. I want you to check mashed lists. It might not be down at the bottom, but we'll fix that. If you don't see it at all, just restart WryeMash, and then you should eventually see it in your mods list. Then you're going to close it. You're going to open Mlox one more time, and Mlox is going to have you put the mashlist.esp file down at the bottom, just like this. Update, load, order, quit. Easy as pie. Start WryeMash back up, you'll be back here, mash list will be down at the bottom the way you want it to. And then we're going to actually run this thing and create it. And this is actually super simple. You're just going to right click on it, go up to import, and then click on merged lists. And what it's going to do is go through every single one of your mods that you have installed, and even the ones that are just sitting in there. So that's why I mentioned that before. It'll actually pick up some information from some of these additional files. It's going to go through all of them and combine the mods that you want both attributes of when that can happen. Now when it's completed that, it's going to pop up sort of a finished list of all of the things it combined, and you can actually see what it did and see what it combined. And let me find you a good example in here. Let's see. Oh, here's one. Okay, so here we have an example where a mod named Creatures and a mod named Necessities of Morrowind are both changing something similar. They're both changing this particular object called random DE cheap food. My guess is that Creatures was adding that particular item to some creatures, to some monsters in the the wood, whereas Nom was probably changing its attributes in terms of whether it satisfies your hunger. There's no reason these two things should conflict, and in fact it's extra awesome because of course if you're out hunting Kwama, you want the eggs that you pick up from it to have an impact. You want them to have that same bonus that another mod is adding. Otherwise it wouldn't work that way. So you can see that the mashless process, the merging process, is actually doing exactly what you want. And now that that's finished and it's down at the bottom and we've got it checked, that part of our task is done. Now I do want to show you one more tab for WryeMash while we're in here, and that is the Saves tab. And I almost didn't show you this because the truth is I don't really want you editing your save file, because if you're editing your save file, that probably means you're uninstalling and installing new mods in the middle of your game session. This is a terrible idea. Morrowind is very flaky. It's not as bad as Daggerfall before it, but it's really finicky, and it doesn't always behave properly when you change major things about the game, when you add mods, or more importantly, when you take them away mid-save game. And it can frequently kill your save games. In fact, I lost a save game a month ago and I was really upset about, but it was probably my fault. So if you want to be absolutely sure that your save game corruption isn't coming from mods specifically like this, you're probably better off to simply come up with one giant mod install, run it for your game until you're sick of that character, and then change it for the next character. Don't change things midway through. Of course, you're probably going to do it anyway, because I do it anyway too. So I want to make sure you understand how to try to save your game, to fix your game, once you've broken it. And it's actually pretty simple. You'll go over to your Saves tab, you'll right-click on the particular save file. Here it's a character of mine named Fioza. It looks like I left her in Newbieland in Satanin. And you can see that since all of these are pink and orange, they all have problems. It'll be green or purple if it's pretty much good to go. But mine are not. Mine are actually old saves, so of course they don't match my current lineup in the game. So once you've clicked on it, you'll come over here and you can see all of the mods that this particular save file is expecting to see, and all of the ones it's not seeing that it's expecting to see, which is a problem. So blue is going to be the ESMs. Those are pretty good for the most part. It's missing, my particular install right now is missing all of these red mods. And of course the orange mods are, I'm pretty sure that means they're safe. And I actually think that I'm trying to remember, but I'm pretty sure the green actually means that it's been updated but is safe. So this is a pretty easy fix. We're just going to click over here, and it's going to uncheck all of the mods that no longer exist and turn green all of the ones that do exist. And then we're going to save it, and there we go. This particular save is green, and it's technically, at least, it's expecting to see only the mods that I have installed. Now, you can right click on this and do additional fixes, but they aren't strictly necessary, and to be honest, I've never had a whole lot of success saving save games with these things, but you can clean up debris cells, for example, leftover cells that specific mods have added that you're never going to use again, and that kind of stuff. So there are a few extra things you can do, but this is basically the bare minimum you should do in case you do pull out a mod midway through. In fact, if you've read the WryeMash manual, and I highly recommend you do and don't just rely on me, you'll find that there's actually ways to update mods in progress. I don't recommend it. There are a lot of mods that you simply cannot do that way. Julin comes to mind, Uvirith's Legacy comes to mind, so it doesn't always work, but it's something you can try. If a modder comes out with a huge new update to a mod you've already got installed, you might be able to install the update and use WryeMash to actually update your save game to rely on the new one as opposed to the old one. Alright, so once you've basically handled all your installers and your mods and everything is correct right up down to your mash list, you can close WryeMash because we are done with it. And we are going to launch the game. We're actually going to play this game, which, usually takes a couple of days of modding before you get to this point. Now, I do want to stress that you need to load it through the script extender, especially if you're using mods that use the script extender. It's simply not going to work otherwise. It will crash. So that's exactly what you're gonna do. You're gonna find wherever you've put the script extender, and you're going to launch it through that. So I did want to note that if you're using Steam, Steam is going to try to load up, so you may as well go ahead and log into it ahead of time. But then we're going to click on the Morrowind script extender launcher and click on Launch Morrowind, and that's going to bring up the old Blood Moon login screen, which is adorable. And we're going to click on Play. Don't click on Data Files. Data Files is totally primitive compared to all of the torture we've just gone through. You click on Play, and most likely Steam will force you to click on it again. And then we'll just click on that one more time. Alright, so here we're going to get loaded into the game. You can see down at the bottom, although this is going to hang, you can see down at the bottom that you're loading all of your mods right now, one at a time. The more you have, the longer it's going to take, but that's okay. And you might actually also be having some errors popping up. If you do, for the most part, you can just click through them, click OK or ignore or whatever it is. Most of your errors are not actually going to cause any problems. If they're going to cause problems, they're going to cause something big, like a major crash. Like if you forget to run it through the script extender, it's going to crash on you. So other than that, you really don't have to worry. They're usually just small version mismatches between your ESMs, and it's nothing big to worry about. And once you're done loading those, you're going to hit your splash screen. You won't be able to see it right now, but normally you will, and you'll hit your new, and you'll log into Morrowind on a brand new character. This has been Bree for skycandy.org. Thank you all so much for checking out my video, and I really hope it's been helpful, because it'd be nice to know that some of my mod obsession over the last forever has actually been useful to folks, to getting them to play some Morrowind. It's an awesome game so many years later. Talk to you guys later. Man, that music is still giving me chills 12 years later.